Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, thanks for joining us here at One Detroit.
Thanks for having me.
You know, we're talking about the 2020 vote, a couple big days coming up. One of them, the August primary next week.
Yes.
You've been busy there and with this pandemic going on. Just what have you been doing lately these past few weeks, these past few days?
I mean, every day, especially now so close to the election, making sure every voter knows how to get their ballot and return it for election day. You know, voters in Michigan have safe options for voting this year. They can vote by mail, they can vote early in person at their clerk's office, or they can vote traditionally in person at your precinct on election day. So making sure just voters know of all the choices that they have and have the certainty and clarity of how to vote this year only increases in intensity and urgency as we get closer to an election. And then the other piece is troubleshooting for the infrastructure itself, meaning working with our clerks to identify needs that may emerge at the last minute and working to fill those needs. For example, we've learned that from several jurisdictions, the need for poll workers to fill spots at the precinct level and help process all these absentee ballots that are getting sent through the mail. So we've recruited for the past several months 5,000 election workers, but one of the things we've been doing over the past several days is working to train and deploy those election workers where they're needed throughout the state.
Where are some of those shortages? Any in the Detroit area?
Yes, all over the state, but for example, the city of Detroit has hundreds of vacancies they're filling as a result of the pandemic, which has led for many traditional poll workers to decline to serve this year, which we understand. We don't want anyone to feel they need to serve if they're immune compromised, for example. But we've also been able to backfill those positions with an enormous number of new volunteers, which requires more training and a lot of extra work. But it's been an enormous inspiration to see thousands of people step up throughout the state, even in the last few weeks, to fill these positions, including the Detroit Pistons. I was actually at their practice facility last night where we were working with the Detroit City Clerk to train their staff to staff the polls on election day and help process absentee ballots. So we're all coming together to make elections work for everyone this year, and it's ultimately been inspiring, but especially at this moment, it's certainly a lot of extra work.
Well, you came in at the same time Proposal 3 kind of changed things.
Yes.
How did that change things and how did it affect the whole system here?
Well, I mean, it's truly a new day for democracy in Michigan. Proposal 3 amended our state constitution to make it much easier to register to vote. Citizens can now register and vote all the way up to and on election day in their local clerk's office. It also created this right to vote by mail that we've been working to implement. But what that means is that it's been my job not just to implement and build the infrastructure for these changes in partnership with our clerks, but also to educate voters about them, which has taken on an increased urgency in this pandemic, where people across the country and here in Michigan are wanting to know, hey, how do I vote safely and securely when I might not be able to leave my home or when I'm afraid to leave my home? And you couple that with images of people waiting in long lines in Wisconsin and Georgia in order to vote, and to give voters the assurance that that's not going to happen here because you have a right to vote by mail has been an added challenge this year. It's why we did a statewide mailing to every voter in the state to say, hey, if you want to vote by mail, here's how. Because we need to directly and efficiently educate every citizen in the state about their rights this year. Again, to give them the certainty and clarity of how they can vote and have their voice be heard, even in the midst of this ever-changing moment that we're in.
Well, you know, I've got my ballot. I haven't filled it out yet. It's coming up on deadline. We worry about, you know, some places mail's taking a little bit longer than it should. Should we be worried about that when we mail in our votes?
Yes, we certainly, I mean, that's kind of another additional variable that we've encountered this year. Working to make sure when you mail your ballot in that it's received and counted has always been an important challenge of implementing a vote by mail system. But that, of course, is even amplified this year as the U.S. Postal Service has been underfunded and overtaxed, overworked throughout the 2020. So we have actually used some of our federal CARES funding to purchase and put out secure ballot drop boxes throughout the state, including 2 that are in Detroit for this primary, and we'll have even more in advance of November, with an aim to put one in every city council district for the November election. But what those are designed to do is for a moment like this, where we're now less than a week prior to an election or primary, in this case, it gives you an option to just, instead of putting your ballot in a mailbox, put it in a drop box. remove the middleman, so to say, of the U.S. Postal Service. And by putting it in that drop box, you'll ensure, as long as it's in that drop box by 8 p.m. on election day, your vote will count.
Now, how much did this cost? And using that CARES money, some people were kind of not that happy about that.
Well, Michigan received $11.3 million in federal funding this year that had to be spent by December in order for us to receive it. And so we've done a number of things, all geared towards making sure voting is accessible and secure and safe for all our voters. We used $4 million of the $11.3 million to mail every voter an application to vote by mail. We used $2 million to provide PPE, masks, gloves, sneeze guards, and the like for our poll workers to ensure every jurisdiction was fully protected and staffed with the appropriate PPE to protect our election workers and our voters. We spent another $2 million on ballot tabulators and high-speed tabulators to help clerks process more quickly and efficiently the ballots that are sent through the mail to them. We spent $1.5 million on additional equipment like ballot openers and envelope openers, I should say, and other types of things like that. And on top of all that, we spent another 1.5 of those funds on ensuring that our disabled voters, particularly blind voters, have access to a state-of-the-art system of requesting and returning ballots by mail. So we've put that money to good use, really meeting every need in our state. We're hopeful the federal government will provide more that we'll be able to use to train more poll workers and put towards more voter education and even more high-speed ballot tabulators. But in every way, we're truly working hard every day to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat in Michigan, and we're ready for our primary and we're ready for November.
Now, President Trump, among others, doesn't like the idea of mail-in voting. It's voter fraud he's concerned about. Isn't it possible for somebody to vote in somebody else's name or vote by mail and then go down to the precinct and vote again?
Well, we certainly know that, one, that would be illegal if someone's going to vote twice and that sort of thing. We've got parameters in place to catch that if someone is intent on breaking the law. For example, voting by mail, which the president and many members of his team have done. It has several security provisions in place to protect against any type of misuse of the ballot. Meaning when you request your ballot, your request has to have your signature on it. That signature is then matched to your voter file in order to verify your identity and trigger the ballot sending to you. Then when you get your ballot, you fill it out, you put it in a secrecy sleeve, and then you put it in an envelope. You then sign the outside of that envelope. That signature is then matched to your voter file signature to again affirm your identity. And of course, it's illegal to forge a signature. It's also really hard to do so successfully. And it's much more likely that a valid ballot will be rejected for a mismatched signature than an invalid ballot, because those are just simply more likely to be the scenario that occurs. So we've got a lot of time-tested security protections in place to ensure only voters who are eligible to vote by mail are able to do so through that signature verification. And then of course we have all the security provisions that's always been in place that are in-person voting. And then finally, for your question about how to prevent someone from voting by mail and then going to vote in person, as soon as someone is sent a ballot, it is inputted into our system. So we know that in our statewide voter file, that person has been sent a ballot. And then as soon as it's received back, that is also noted. So that if someone were to show up and the election worker looked up their name, it would immediately pop up to say, hey, this person's already sent back their ballot, and they would be breaking the law if they were to vote again.
Well, what do you tell voters that are going to show up at the polls? What should they do? Any things they should be prepared for, things that they should do?
Yeah, number one, wear a mask. We're encouraging everyone to wear a mask, and certainly poll workers will be wearing a mask as well. And we're working, by getting so many people more than ever before in our state to vote by mail or vote early in their clerk's office, which you can do up until election day, up until the Monday prior to election day. When you show up in person, you should expect to see less crowds than you normally would have, because we're seeing more people vote in other ways this year, but also be prepared to see a very sanitary and social distancing compliant environment, where other than that, and with your mask and with the PPE that clerks will have to keep everyone safe and healthy, you can vote in person just like you always have, with, again, those protections in place. If you choose to do so, your local precinct will be open. which is made possible in part by the fact of the thousands of people who are signing up to serve as poll workers to ensure those precincts can stay open this year.
Well, you have heard in the past some precincts, big lines, even before you have social distancing and that sort of thing. Any concerns of any precincts kind of clogging up this time around?
Well, we're keeping an eye on that, and we've tracked that data throughout the year. Notably, in our March presidential primary, we saw no lines at our precincts. In our May local elections, we saw no lines at our precincts. And that was in part due to the fact that even though we saw record turnout in each of those two elections this year, so many people voted by mail that you didn't have the crowding that you may have seen in a Georgia or a Wisconsin, where the vote by mail system simply was not robust and as widely utilized as it is here in Michigan. So I'm very confident that we've done everything we can to mitigate the potential for long lines on election day next week and in November. And we'll continue to do so, because the more people who vote by mail, that's less people showing up in the precincts on election day, in mitigating, again, the possibility of crowding, and really ensuring that for people who do need to or choose to vote in person on election day, that experience will be streamlined, secure, and safe.
And lastly, what would you like to see in terms of percentages, the number of people voting in person, voting absentee? Maybe a little higher because we're under a pandemic right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see record turnout this year, period, which is really encouraging that even in the midst of this pandemic, the two elections we've held this year and the two elections we're about to hold in August and November, all the data points to record-breaking turnout across the board. And so that's a great thing for our state. And I think we're also going to see records broken in the number of people voting by mail. We've already seen that for our August primary, where 2 million people have requested to vote by mail, which is higher than ever before in any election in our state. The highest prior to this was 1.15 million people voting by mail in the November 16 presidential election. So we're on track to see records continue to shatter by this November's election, where as many as 3 million people may be voting by mail. That, of course, means our clerks will have to work 3 times as hard as ever before to get those ballots out and get them returned on time. But my hope is that no matter how someone chooses to vote this year, that they choose to vote, and they do so with the confidence that however they vote, be it by mail, early, or on election day, that their vote will be safe, secure, counted, and they won't have to risk their health in any way in order to cast their ballot.
Secretary of State Benson, thanks for talking to One Detroit.
Thanks for having me. I'm sure we'll talk again before all is said and done.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.